National Election Headquarters.
Welcome back. Shannon Heckt sat down with Richard Nelson to talk about his bid for the governor's seat. Take a look.
Welcome back. We're continuing our series to meet with all 7 of the major candidates for governor, and this week I have State Representative Richard Nelson. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So Richard, I want to hear a little bit about more of why you wanted to get into this race. There was early GOP endorsements for Jeff Landry, and there's a number of other Republicans in this race. So why did you want to put your hat in this as well?
Sure. So, for me, it was really about what I want to do for the state. I've been in the legislature now for 4 or 5 years, and I've pushed a lot of big initiatives and really trying to, I think, move the ball forward. Fix a lot of the problems I see in state government that I really think are holding us back. And for me, that was always the goal. I mean, it's not political games or who's going to win or who's going to get the endorsement. It's really about how do I push the message and I think give people the option to really fix their problems, right? So, I say all the time, if Louisiana were just average, we'd all live 4 years longer and get a 33% raise.
And you've seen the major investments that have happened with early childhood education and higher education as well. With the forecasted change in revenue, should you be elected, how do you plan to continue to pay for those investments?
Sure, I think that one of the biggest things that we have to look at is how do you make the state successful in the long run, right? So a lot of the money that we've had in the last couple of years has kind of been a result of the COVID money, federal recovery from the COVID money, some of these other federal spending programs, as well as some hurricane recovery, right? So we had $20 billion plus dollars in damage, and everybody ran out to Home Depot, and we've had a lot of sales tax collections and things like that. So, some of that is similar to what we saw after Katrina. We had this kind of big spike in collections, and then, then came down. And so I think trying to preserve or, trying to fix the system moving forward is one of my really the plank of my platform, right, is let's build a structure, especially around the tax code, that will attract businesses, that will attract people here. And I think that's the only way that you're going to be successful in the long run. And we really have to be able to save ourselves. And I think that's why we need to have a competitive economy, kind of like our neighbors in Texas or Florida that are really successful at attracting people, even from Louisiana.
And something this election season that we've heard a lot of is crime. And it's an issue that Louisiana has dealt with for a long time. We've heard a lot of sound bites about it, but I want to hear about some specific policies that you would want to put into place to try to combat this issue.
Sure. I point out, like you said, Louisiana has been the murder capital of the country since 1989 or something like that. We've been 1 or 2 in the highest murder rates. This is a problem that's been around for a very long time. I think COVID exacerbated it for sure. There's a couple things that I think are causing that, right? So I think police, we have a huge shortage of police, and Baton Rouge, Shreveport, New Orleans, and then state police in general, I think, are experiencing all those problems. And so you're not going to be able to get crime under control when you have historically low levels of police. And so the legislature this last year, we passed some increases in state support for pay for local law enforcement, as well as on the state police level. I think I would continue to invest and raise that state police pay so we can attract more qualified candidates, and then use some of those state police resources to augment the areas where they're really seeing those crime spikes. And I think that that's something that you can do on a state level as governor. I think, though, you really have to look at the broader picture too. I brought a bill 2 years ago to really focus on recidivism. About half of our prisoners that are held in local jails, which is about half of the whole population, end up coming back. So we let them out, and then they go and reoffend. And I think you got to close that revolving door.
And also this last legislative session, there was a lot of social issues that took the spotlight from a lot of these, insurance and other things that could have been discussed. I want to talk about your take on some of these, especially the 3 main bills, starting with the ban on gender-affirming care for minors. Where was kind of your stance on that, and the veto override as well?
Sure. So, on these big culture war social issues, I generally think they're a waste of time. I mean, it really doesn't teach a kid to read, doesn't pave a road, doesn't give anybody affordable insurance, and it really sucked a lot of air out of our legislative session, and really stopped us from solving those bigger problems. I think it took a lot of that away. So, in general, I'm not a fan of those issues. I'm more of a moderate. I don't necessarily think that that's where we should be spending our time, especially, like I said, we're at the bottom, and we're 4 years behind the average in the country in life expectancy. And so on the gender affirming care, I voted in favor of that. I think that, or that the gender affirming care ban, I think that when you look at some of the research around the country and around the world, I think that was something that, that's a bill I was comfortable supporting, and I overrid the veto as well. The other two bills that were more of, I guess, the Don't Say Gay bill or pronoun bills or something like that, I think that those were, I voted against them, and I voted against the veto override as well, just because I don't really think that, opening more teachers and schools to lawsuits over these kind of things is really the way to go to solve any of the problems that were articulated as the justification for those bills.
Mm-hmm. Well, Richard, I appreciate your insight. I would like to give you a chance to tell voters one more time about why they should choose you.
Sure. So I think that Louisiana is on a threshold. We are losing about 40,000 people a year. We have significant challenges, and many of these have been around for 100 years. I go back to Huey Long, the governor in the 20s and 30s, as really setting up this system that is very centralized in Baton Rouge. Everybody pays their tax money. It all comes to the Capitol, and the Capitol and the governor are the ones that decide where it goes. Whether you want to get your school paid for, or a new bridge or a new road. It's really dependent on the Capitol in Baton Rouge. And so this was a system that Huey Long set up for businesses as well, not just local governments. They're really dependent on hiring lobbyists to come and get some special tax credit and carve out. And this system has failed us. For the last 100 years, we've been not keeping up with the rest of the country as far as population growth. And for me, that's the system that I want to dismantle. If it was LSU football and we were losing to every team every year, we would fire the coach, we'd fire the mascot, we'd fire everybody. But in Louisiana, we keep sending the same politicians running the same plays every year, and it hasn't produced any results. So, I think if they want that extra 4 years of their life back, if they want the 33% raise just to be average, I'm probably their only guy, because I'm really running against this Huey Long style government that's been around for a long time, and I'm really trying to bring the change we need.
All right, well, Richard Nelson, Republican running for governor, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll be right back.
All right, thank you, Shannon. Next week, we'll talk to Republican candidate John Schroeder. Stay with us. We'll be right back.